I started my political life in 1977. I was 13 at the time that Steve Biko was murdered. And the murder of Steve Biko woke me up as a young white youth who'd grown up in Nigeria and Ghana and then a little bit of Botswana. And it made me believe as a white person in black consciousness. And I still believe in black consciousness and in the message of Steve Biko and the incomplete or the uncompleted work that black consciousness requires. Later, I became a Marxist when I was at Oxford University. I was part of the militant tendency in Britain, an entryist into the Labour Party. And from the militant tendency, I became a member of the Marxist Workers' Tendency of the African National Congress, which I joined in 1996. But what I want to say is that from the early 1990s, I took a detour, and that detour lasted for about 25 years. And it was a detour from the belief that we could overthrow capitalism and construct a socialist society into a struggle for human rights. And after 1994 and after 1996, a struggle to realize the South African Constitution. And I think it was an extremely valuable and productive detour in which many things were achieved and many lives were saved and many lives were bettered. Not by me, by all of us in this struggle. But I have to confess, and this is the first confession, that as we look in 2019 at the monstrous inequality that exists in South Africa and the world and everything that goes with it, I think that we are back facing the very same questions that the socialists have always asked about power, the role of the state, what should be the role of the state, the role of business and capital. Those questions have developed, and I think that perhaps more and more so the questions of the exclusion of young people from society, the exclusion of women and girls from society have to be added to that broth of the state and power and business. But as I leave Section 27, and this isn't just a thought that came to me on leaving Section 27, my fear is that if the human rights movement and the social justice movement doesn't address these questions squarely, if it doesn't build it into our narrative, then we're not going to succeed. And that's one of the themes I'm going to build on in the course of this presentation. But having made that confession, I have to tell you, I hope none of you are disappointed, that I'm not about to go and join the Socialist Workers' Revolutionary Party or any other muddled Trotskyist grouping. And I'm a Trotskyist, so don't blame me. Or don't feel bad if I talk about muddled Trotskyist groupings. I know I'll offend some people. And part of the reason for that is because, and this too is a confession, and something I would really like us to debate honestly, not tonight, there won't be time. But my feeling is that the left, and in that I include myself, by its failure to adapt, by its failure to resonate, to take on board new ideas and methods, has often disabled the poor and the working class and has become a facilitator for neoliberalism. We disabled ourselves and made it possible for neoliberalism to rampage across our world in the way that it has done so. And what frustrates me is that many leaders of the left, academics, are masters of critique and of talking to a shrinking band of converts, but they're incapable of a cross-class galvanizing vision which can mobilize people towards a better future. And as a result, we render the powerful tools and traditions of socialist struggle. And they are powerful tools, and they are deep traditions. If you study the history of the 20th century, they turn them into a blunt instrument. And we have to think about that. And it was into this vacuum left by the left, by socialists, that civil society stepped. Now, when I joined civil society in 1994, I joined the AIDS Law Project. I didn't even know what civil society was. I never heard of it. Civil society is one of those terms that donors have come to love and fund and so on in the last 30 years. I'm not sure still what civil society is. Where does civil society start? Where does civil society finish? So when I talk about civil society, I'm talking about that part of civil society that is pro-poor, pro-justice, pro-social justice. But at the point when I joined the AIDS Law Project in 1994 and left the Marxist Workers' Tendency of the ANC, it was clear that the world had changed, and it was clear that socialist revolution was not coming in 5, 10, or 15 years, which was what we used to tell ourselves. 5, 10, or 15 years. Socialism or barbarism. Well, we have a lot of barbarism today in the world, but we don't have socialism. But if we're going to get socialism and social justice, which is how I prefer to frame it these days, not because I'm a reformist, then we're going to have to think carefully about how we go forward. Now, I'm going to make some criticisms about civil society, and it's mainly about civil society that I want to talk in this lecture. But I do want to say that as far as I'm concerned, civil society, active citizen, organized and active citizens, is the key to saving civilization. The key to saving civilization. And I don't exaggerate. Civilization doesn't exist in many parts of the world, and it's threatened in many other parts of the world. Civil society is the key to galvanizing the state. And in South Africa, civil society has proved its mettle, and it's beginning to more and more so globally. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this recent book by Dennis Davis and Michel Leroux. It's called Lawfare, Judging Politics in South Africa. It's not a bad book. But one of the things I found interesting about it, a lot of it's a rehash. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. One of the things I found interesting about it is at page 273, Davis and Leroux provide a 4-page list of court cases around state capture. And they preface the list by saying only the judiciary lived up to its constitutional mandate in the Zuma era. And I don't think that's right. I think that active citizens lived up to their constitutional mandate. And that the idea of a participatory democracy and the rights that go with a participatory democracy were vindicated in the struggle against state capture. I also think that what Davis and Leroux fail to point out is that the majority of these cases that they list were triggered by civil society. It was only later that political parties got in on the game of lawfare, and they did a very good job, the EFF and the DA, in using the law. But it was civil society first. And they miss important cases. They miss, for example, the campaign by Right to Know around the secrecy bill. And you have to say, and we don't say this enough, that act was a key part of the design of state capture. Shut up the media. Make it impossible to report corruption. Right to Know, by its fantastic campaign, derailed that act. And it was that made it possible for Amar Bungani, the SABC8, Tandeka is here, the SABC8, the Daily Maverick and others to play, again, to vindicate another constitutional right, the right to freedom of expression, the right to a free media, to tell people what is going on. There was another case brought by civil society that's not mentioned here. the campaign around party political funding. It was a long, bumpy road for right to vote. They lost a few times, but they persisted. And eventually we got the party political funding bill. And the last criticism, and I'm not bashing Dennis and Michel, is it doesn't also make any mention of socio-economic rights litigation, which really is one of the only things that has given tangible meaning to the Constitution in the last 20 years. The work of TAC, of Equal Education, of SERI, Legal Resources Center, LHR, and many others. And that's the basis on which I say civil society has been the engine of what little progress we've made in tackling inequality. Without civil society, South Africa would look poorer, sicker, and more unequal. It's hard to believe that, but that's the fact. Without TAC, 5 million more people would have died of AIDS. Without the work of the Treatment Action Campaign, 4.5 million people now accessing antiretroviral treatment today. Without the work of Equal Education, we wouldn't be as aware of the education crisis and so on and so on.